Stay up on the real culture of Detroit by tuning in to the Detroit is Different podcast network weekly. Music, art, business, comedy, and never before told stories from the people of Detroit.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast studios. And today I have a very special guest, someone that has been I don't even want to say friend. That's kind of something overused. Let's use the term in economics. An asset for a community, for our people, for Detroit, and really on like an international basis, an international figure. But he is right in the neighborhood of the greatest high school ever, the Great Northwestern. And not just Northwestern, but just really in the community with an asset as well. Hush House, Eastern Michigan, international politics, so much more. Baba Charles Simmons, how are you today, my brother?
I'm wonderful. Glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, long time coming, but you are definitely, as I call it, one of those big homies, an OG that is pivotal in a lot of things. And glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to start this Detroit is Different story off, and we briefly, I know a little bit, but let's introduce the people. Your Detroit story, your peoples, how did they end up around this way of the Detroit River and in the city of Detroit?
Well, I was born in River Rouge.
Okay.
And my mother was a live-in domestic at that time. My father died when I was about early 3, an accident. And so my mother had me living on the street where I lived. There were mostly family members. It seemed like everybody on the street was related.
Was related to you?
And one of my great aunt had a nightclub in her house 24/7.
I'm with that already. You said a 24/7 nightclub, man. People was going to the club at like so we thought the day party was something new. The day party been around for a minute.
It's been this was in the 1940s.
People was going to the 3 p.m. the day party. They actually call it the Darty now. Day party, Darties. They was going to the Darty back in, you said what era?
In the 1940s.
They was at the Darty in the 1940s. So
that's right.
Ain't no telling. I assume like they said that you needed Sammy Davis Jr. said, man, you had to do everything back then to make money. So I assume ain't no telling what type of entertainment will you have to do to earn a little bit of money. You know what I'm saying? You had to be a heck of a singer and all that back then.
Right.
You know?
So she ran the gambling and she cooked the food she sold. There was dancing in the front room. I remember it's the first time I ever saw a jukebox. It was in the front, beautiful jukebox in the front room, and she packed a pistol on her apron. And anybody got rowdy, she physically would throw them out.
Okay.
So anyway, my mother said she came to get me one day, and my aunt was drunk, and I was drunk too. So she said she decided to bring me to Detroit to stay with my church folks.
Okay, all right. I guess, yeah. Sometimes when you running that 24/7 operation, sometimes watching that kid it can be a little tough. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, but before River Rouge, like just this whole area, where are your people from?
My maternal folks are from Arkansas, and my paternal people are from Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah, and I spent my summers on a farm in Georgia.
Whereabouts, Georgia?
Near Augusta.
Okay.
But way out. I mean, it was way out in the farm country.
Okay.
But it was a wonderful experience for me and that family. It was a family situation, although this was clearly the period of segregation. Mm-hmm. But I felt quite isolated from that external force because the family was so large, and we only associated with black people in that community. Mm-hmm. Now, traveling to get there was not. We had to deal with all the blatant segregation en route going from Detroit to.
You remember that?
Oh yeah, clearly. I mean, I had an experience one day. They called the sheriff on me. I was about 8 years old. Mm-hmm. Because we had stopped at this in these gas stations in Tennessee or Kentucky that has a restaurant attached to it. Mm-hmm. way out in the country, and sawdust on the floor and all that. And nobody was in the car when I woke up. And I didn't know, I assumed my folks had gone directly into the restaurant that was in front of the car, and they had gone somewhere else. But I went and opened the door of this place, just a screen door, and stuck my head in this, and I saw quickly the hatred that was spewed at me was vicious.
This ain't my people.
I mean, it was white men sitting around tables, and the way they looked at me, I saw death.
Wow.
And I backed. I didn't even step in. I just backed out.
Now, I also have this question. If you remember that in the travels, as you know, we have such modern way of thinking. As I've drove trucks and things like that, like the interstate, pre-interstate, like it's not like where to go towns. Hence, we're familiar with the Green Book concept and things like that. But what was it like even traveling to know where you're going? Because a lot of the roads weren't like as established and paved.
That's right. A lot of the roads were dirt. But most of them were at least one lane highways, you know, and so you had to negotiate around trucks. I mean, people going in both directions on, well, 2 lanes going and coming, but very little signage, no interstate systems at all at that time.
And that's where, like, you know, because sometimes we think like, oh, well, you could have did this or that, and it's like, nah, it's like you just you really had to know how to read a map.
Right. And when you couldn't stop anywhere, you know, you had to wait till you got into a black community in a town.
Yeah.
And then they would put you up, sort of like a bed and breakfast sort of arrangement in a family home.
Hence, like the Green Book concept.
Yes.
But it wasn't even as, like, just because you in the Green Book don't mean by the time you get to Memphis, they have other spaces to stay. Like if it's like the holiday time, it could be another family there, and they're going to be like, look, you're going to have to keep going
That's right.
Going over to Nashville because we don't got no more space for you. Or here go to back in the day, like it's no maps, it's no interstates. They'd be like, all right, so look, you're going to go 4 miles this way, and then another mile that way, and then another mile that way, and a lot of landmarks and stuff. A lot of
what we would call now back roads.
Yeah.
So most of everything were back roads.
Everything was a back road. And then even the lights and you know.
So it was, but as a child, it was still a very rich experience with my sister and grandmother, and the food was great. I mean, traveling, my grandmother had a great big basket of fried chicken and sweet potato pie and all the soul food. So I was,
you were good.
Smorgasbord en route.
Okay. Also, I'm guessing and then also the other thing, even with the whole, like, it's a rest stop and stuff. I mean, rest stops are some wow houses.
Yeah, there was no such thing. At least I never saw a rest house. It was just where you stopped when you, if you got too tired or needed to go to the bathroom, you just had to go out in the woods. I mean, there was no bathrooms available, you know.
So now let's get into this journey of being back in Detroit. What neighborhood did your mom select?
We were in Black Bottom first. I remember we were on Farnsworth, and this was long before you had the Science Center and the museum and all that there. And I don't remember that place. But the first place I remember was on Whitewood, which around the corner from Tabernacle Baptist Church.
Okay.
Near Beechwood, Milford and Cobb. Epworth, that I went to Sampson Elementary.
Okay.
So my grandmother and grandfather both were activists. My grandfather was an activist in the trade union movement. He was in the UAW. Now this was before it was even legal. The UAW became legal in 1941. But he was involved before that, and so I heard the stories of how the men had to fight. I mean, they all packed pistols. All the men I saw, and they were deacons at King Solomon.
Hey,
they were packing.
You still wearing the King Solomon?
Still wearing the King Solomon shirt.
Shirt, yeah. Hey, I think as when we get into the histories of the Union and what it means, and even the union being open for Black people to be a part of the union. Like it's some fight struggles that exist that are spoke of, but I don't know how much we internalize really what was going on.
Right.
Like Inkster and like
And the Rouge.
yeah, and some of the things that would happen, like a lot of
There's a lot of violence.
Yeah.
A lot of violence. The companies hired gangsters to assassinate the union leaders, and there were fights in the street all the time, and it was very bloody.
Mm-hmm.
Now the UAW was one of the first to desegregate, but that wasn't uniform because there were some plants where the white workers refused to work next to Black workers, so they would go on strike.
It's one of the, like most things in any tradition of institutions, of American institutions, racism in American institutions, I don't think it is one where it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
You know, I can't, I can't think of one. So the education, justice, working, business, sports,
it permeates
entertainment,
the entire system.
psychology.
Yeah.
It is, as Neely Fuller would say. If study Neely Fuller, if you all don't know, but it's just a part of the arc. So having you said your grandfather was an activist,
right.
And then you also said
my grandmother was active with the Baptist Women's Auxiliary and other women's organizations. Now that was a descendant of the colored women's movement, the colored women's club movement from the 1800s. With the women like Mary McLeod Bethune, Ida B. Wells, many of them were involved in the colored women's club movement. And it was, they were fighting for social justice, racial justice. And their slogan was, "We lift as we climb." So they wanted to be, they wanted the community to be high achievers. And that was something different than the current women's struggles that I follow now. Well, sometimes the emphasis is on the individual achievement. At that time, the emphasis was on lifting up the group, the community as a whole, and the family. Mm-hmm. So women were seeking higher achievement too, but they valued the entire group is a we thing as opposed to I.
And with that, just, being the home of the Piper Carter podcast and so many women that work with Detroit is different. I think one of the critiques made, and I'm usually one that pushes back, but I'm just raising this critique, is that that during those struggles with a lot of those movements, women were lifting everything up, but never, quote unquote, felt as though they received the benefits.
Yes.
And more than just the credit, but just the benefits of that fight,
right.
Which is an argument that that I sometimes just always want to raise the height, like, and Lord knows I'm a man speaking on this, but it's hard to put ourselves in the place of where things were at history at that time to know where things were, as we were even talking about other infrastructures that just existed in the limitations that so many people had. It's similar to when some of the young people say, "Oh man, if I was going to be a slave, I'd just turn around and kill every cracker that I could." And It's like you're taking a modern thought process and placing yourself in certain situations. Right. Whereas I do think that there were, even to this day, when you think of organizations like the NAACP, it's the work of women that move forward those movements. The Black church itself, like, even to this day, like, if you remove women from the Black church, I think that the institution will
collapse.
Yes. Yeah. So but in that discussion point, there were a lot of women that did make waves and were working through, as they say, a lot of the men to make a lot of things happen. And sometimes some of the strongest figures, it's not, I don't like that, behind every great man is a great woman. in reality, it was a lot of women recognizing what could function and how things could function. Similar to that movie, The Banker. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this, but it's with Samuel L. Jackson and I forget the brother, Anthony Mackie, where a brother that used a series of different white men to purchase properties for him so that he could develop for them, but he worked through those white men that he had to use because to navigate the system to function. And this happened a lot in business dealings. A lot, like a lot of the numbers operations throughout Black America, it was women working and operating and really taking the lead on a lot of this for the lending, for the business functionality, but they had to work through a lot of men being in those operations. You know, so I think it was more of a cohesive relationship. And sometimes when we look at the lens, it's like, well, this is just for men or this is from women. I don't know if it is as black and white as sometimes it's presented. That's
yes. And I think you have to look at a case-by-case situation. I remember some discussion, because I went to both my grandparents took me with them to their meetings.
Okay.
So I got to hear the women's conversations and the men. Not that I was really paying that much attention consciously.
Yeah.
But by osmosis, I got a lot of it. And and their attitudes was something that I picked up.
Yeah.
The strength of their commitment to change and to service was apparent. The seriousness that they had, that was very clear to the young people.
And I think you were listening more because it definitely had strong impressions on you and your work.
Yes.
And let's get into that. Like, so in your journey in school, when did you start saying, all right, one second, I can organize. I can be a part of this. I can play a role with my people.
Well, having watched my grandparents mainly, and my parents, my mother and stepfather, they were business people in River Road. So they had a grocery store and a gas station and an apartment building, which they built themselves. So I was around people who just took it upon themselves to do what needed to be done. There was not a discussion. If you see a problem, you got to solve it, you know. And so they had, we had some get up and go about them. And
We with that.
They weren't waiting for a grant. They weren't waiting for permission from anybody, you know, just this got to be done. Let's get together and do it.
You said Augusta, right? Something in that James Brown water.
That's right.
That James Brown water. You gotta watch them Augusta guys. Yeah. Going.
So my grandmother also taught Negro history in the church at King Solomon.
So history, and this is a discussion
and at home, I should say.
This has been a discussion that's been happening for a while. I actually want you to do one thing for me. This is like a production note. Can you move your water to the other side?
Oh, okay.
Let's move that water to the other side. There we go. Yeah. All right. I was gonna ask this question. Because right now people are talking about they're taking away history from schools and da-da-da-da. And I'm like, it always made me think as a child of Aisha Shule, like, I think Black history was always more of a griot thing. It was a luxury and great that it was taught in schools, but I don't know if public schools ever really framed Black history in the right perspective anyway. But the church was an institution where Black studies and history was taught. And this is pre-Carter G. Woodson Black History Week. This is just independent, like, nah, you're going to learn about your people.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What were her materials? What was she teaching? What do you remember? Like, how did she, was that commonplace? Was that just a King Solomon thing? Like,
at the time, I thought it was universal. But clearly it wasn't. But I thought that everybody was doing that. So it was never a question to me. Because in our house, we had the pictures all over the house of all the great Black people, the high achievers.
So in the 40s, who were those people that were in the house?
We had Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune, of course, Harriet Tubman. Sojourner Truth. The abolitionists were all there. And my grandfather had he felt close to the Pullman Porters, A. Philip Randolph, and of course, Du Bois and Booker T were in the house, and I thought that all these people were relatives. Because we had to address all adults as auntie or uncle, cousin. I mean, practically every adult had a familial label, and I really thought that we were all related. When I saw the pictures, and I thought, well, Du Bois was an uncle or something, or grandfather. I didn't know. I never really raised that question, but I just assumed that because we were always calling everybody aunt and uncle, that they were related. And some were and some weren't. I didn't know necessarily who were. But the adults acted like parents. Even an older teenager would act as a parent over younger children.
But I think that may be also a societal thing of the community and camaraderie.
Yeah.
So what was some of so you're learning Black studies, which already incepts a different idea. What was one of the first things that you remember? Like, was it in high school? Was it in middle school? Where it's like, hey, we can start writing some articles. We in the school paper. We can organize. What was one of the first acts that you took that aligned you with movement work?
Now, I think it was probably. Well, this was not my organizing, but my grandmother. I was in Chatsey High School. I was clowning around in a trade class. It was an electric shop, and I was clowning around with some other guys in there. And so the teacher shouted at us. He said, and it was a white teacher who, very good teacher, a very serious man. But he shouted at us, said, "God damn it, the reason that you're all," and there were 3 Black kids who were playing, and it was an integrated class. And he said, "God damn it, the only reason you all are here because you're too damn dumb to do anything else." And so that really was the first time that I can recall having that type of an assault. So it stopped me in my tracks, and I went directly to the counselor. I said, well, I want to switch to college prep because I was in trade school. And because I noticed that that we were studying different things. And so I thought he was saying we were dumb because I was in the trade curriculum. I didn't really think that it was because I was Black that he was saying that. I was saying, well, I'm in the wrong curriculum. So I went to the counselor and asked to get changed. And she said, I couldn't get changed because I had not passed a certain test. I don't know what test she was talking about. But I went and told my grandmother. My grandmother also made hats for all the church women in Detroit at that time. She had her own business in the house. And she was out, on the forefront of all the community struggles. And so she, when I told her
she had some social capital and relationships throughout community.
Yes, she was a fighter. She was on the PTA, the Parents Teachers Association. Anything that was going on in the neighborhood, she was involved in it. And so when I told her this, she put on that big hat. You probably the hat's like Aretha Franklin had on. And a veil and gloves. The women wore all that to church. So she put on all that going to church meeting stuff, and took me. We went downtown on the streetcar to the school board building, and she went in and talked to the school board executive. I don't know what they said, but when she left, I was in college prep.
Wow. There we go. But the first action really was your visceral reaction, like, one second, what you saying right here?
Right.
Teacher, whatever, Mr. Jones.
Right.
Nah, I don't agree with that. That's it. That don't sit well with me. Then you go to your counselor.
Yeah.
And that didn't sit well with you. You told your grandma was like, oh, no, we on it. But so...
And my grandfather was the same. Whenever we were out and there was a problem, he was aggressive and addressed it right away, no BS, whatever it was. I mean, he was problem solving. So I saw, these were role models I had, that if there's a problem, you attack it. And, But
I believe the impact... when you see a person address a problem externally, that's like, it's substantive. It's like, I'm observing it, and that's something.
Right.
But now when it's internally, it's like, whoa, like that's an intrinsic value.
Right.
Extrinsic values are amazing. I mean, really, it's a lot of lessons in life you rather learn from witnessing than experiencing. Trust me, I went to Northwestern High School. You rather learn from witnessing than experiencing many lessons in life. But to intrinsically experience that at an age in high school, I imagine that has to bolster a different amount of confidence of like, okay, through organizing movement work, being Black, not using it as a limitation, a lot of things can change. That has to be phenomenal. And I'm guessing, even though, rest in peace and all blessings and praise to your grandparents, but I'm guessing like that was also something that she kind of got a kick out of, like, yep, Charles gonna learn this at this age now, so that when you this age now, you can keep moving through movement, knowing like, no, it's possible, because if it was possible in the 40s,
right,
it damn sure gonna be possible in the 2020s.
Right. Now she was the reason I was in trade school in the first place, because she was a Booker T. Washington industrial education person, and said, you have to have a trade. You got to have a trade. No matter what else you do, you got to have a trade. And so that she was very concerned about me and being in that that direction.
So within that, and I want you to speak on this, I'm gonna adjust one of my cameras, but let's talk a little bit about Booker T. Washington, as he has become, back in revisionist history, a very polarizing figure for many Black folks, especially. It's people that look at Booker T. Washington's writing as like, what type of Uncle Tom and step and fetch it type of brother was this to say blah, 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 blah. And I actually find his writings, especially his work directly up from slavery, as I can't ever put myself in that space. The same way that, like, they say the Supreme Court tries to live the document of the Supreme Court, and a lot of pastors say, like, we have to look at what the Bible means and the meanings of it today, of his journey from Hampton, Virginia, ending up in Tuskegee in Alabama, like what that means. But what's your take on people such as your grandmother and a lot of Black folks? Why did so many people gravitate to the teachings and the works and message of Booker T. Washington?
Well, at the time, I didn't know all of the details about his ideology or his style. All I knew was that he was a high achiever, and everybody that we had on all the pictures of the people we had on our walls were people who were high achievers. Yeah. And I never heard anybody during that period attack Booker T during that period, in my experience, because at church, we also had pictures, the same pictures were in the church. Yeah. And Reverend Boone, who was the minister then, was the historian for the National Baptist Convention. So he was a person who had many degrees and experience. He was a lawyer, college professor, all types of stuff before he came into the ministry. So he was a Booker T. Washington person as well. So I hadn't really read much of his work, but it was always presented as a very high quality, high achievement projects for Black people, and he was a great person of great accomplishment. So I didn't hear any challenges to that view at that time.
So what I'm asking for actually from you is something that it gets under the skin of a lot of historians I know, and even Baba Malik too, is you can't be Pastor Boone or your grandmother, but what do you think about that message resonated with the people? What was it in his message that you think resonated to capture the hearts and minds of people at that time, being that you were there that time to kind of see how they functioned?
Well, I think there was a deep desire for education. Education was still considered sacred from the time of from our enslavement period. Education was always considered sacred. If you could learn how to read and write, freedom was associated with getting this education, and the quality of life was associated with getting the education. So I never heard anybody question that during that period. And I do know that the emphasis was on trade, having skilled trades. Now, I saw people who had attended Tuskegee. There were a couple of people in the church who were skilled tradesmen, and I observed their character and their style. And these were people who were very serious, very dedicated community servants, had a lot of respect in the community. So I thought those are Tuskegee people, they're associated with Booker T. Washington. So that was all reinforcement to me. And so everybody was on the page that you had to get more and more education. And once people obtained the education, they were going to come back and serve the community. That was a part of our thinking in general. I never thought about people that would get education or achievement and would desert the community. That was unthought of.
I asked this question also, and now I want to continue into your journey.
Did I answer your question?
Oh, you did.
Oh, okay.
You did. And I think you gave a very practical response to it, because for people that may not know, I'm definitely synthesizing the arguments for, I think, leading theories of what could lead to Black empowerment during the 1930s when I synthesized this message of W.E.B. Du Bois was in his concept from the Niagara Conference and the talented 10th model, meaning that if we can present to white America Black exceptionalism, this will welcome our people into a quality of life where we will not experience the horrors that we're experiencing in America. That is a synthesized version of W.B. Du Bois theory into Blackness. Booker T. Washington's theory into Blackness was we need to function from what we know can be built. We need to be around substantively what is most important to humanity and people to function in communities itself. Hence the skilled trades, building, farming, building, farming, and the closer you are to that, things that are essential to life. And we need to play a role in industry. And through our role in industry, that will welcome the quality of life for our people. And some of his, I'm not even going to go deeper into that, but that's a synthesized version of Booker T. Washington. And then Marcus Garvey at the time, theories were, these white folks are crazy. I'm going to synthesize it. It was, we need our own nation. We need our own structure, and we need to galvanize around that, because clearly the horrors that we're facing, we cannot rely on the infrastructure of this to fix it. And to synthesize one against the other, like I think a lot of academicians have done over time, is kind of doing some of what I've just done and making it seem as if one is better than the other and everything. I think it's case by case, and in certain arguments, it's a little bit of everything, like society itself. But I don't know if one can become more prevailing, because all need to coexist depending upon the dynamic experience we have as Black people. But since then, I think when in retrospect, Booker T. Washington, especially in a lot of academics, is looked at with some of his other views about his partnerships in industry and the role of what we can do and how we can function in it, is looked at like, oh, what is this guy saying? So that's why I just wanted to present that.
Well, I didn't recognize any qualitative difference in Booker T and W.B. during that period. It wasn't until I was grown
years later
that I realized the differences. But even today, I accept both views as being necessary.
I think all three.
And all three, yes. And I had an uncle who was a Garveyite. I didn't see him a lot, but I observed him. And he had his orientation was Black and African, but he was also a skilled worker.
Okay.
And in his generation and mine, in those days, a lot of the men from the South had the capability of building a house.
I think
that wasn't unusual.
And this is another reality of America that's often not spoke about.
Yeah.
Especially in the American South, quote unquote, post Reconstruction, as they say, is that, and then even really an argument to this day, Black people possessed all the skills to function a society, meaning due to antebellum enslavement of our people, the white folks that were active in the industry, their activity was like once removed from the functionality of it. So it was us that knew how to grow. It was us that knew how to build. It was us that knew how to work the machinery and all of that. Like it became clear as America was transitioning from an agricultural nation to an industrial nation that, Black people are way better for what we function with. Hence the whole $5 work week for people in general, which was $3 for Black folks. But Black people were needed. The Great Migration was not just Black people saying, it's opportunity up there. It was industry saying, we better get some Black people up here because these white people are not the best workers. They really don't know how to do anything, and they haven't done any real labor. These Black folks were the reason our nation even exists in the first place. Let's get the best workers up here so this country can make some money. And that's not explicitly presented the way that I think it should be presented, even in that wonderful archive of museum history at the Henry Ford Museum. But it is the truth. Hence the relationship between Booker T. Washington and Henry Ford and Andrew Carnegie and Van Buren and all of these people. Like, he had relationships because it's like he's the best way that you can train these agricultural workers into industrial workers and even get any productivity from workers in general. When I say he, meaning like some of the theories instituted from what Black people were doing.
Well, my thinking about the reason why Henry Ford wanted Black workers to come to Detroit was more so that my thinking emphasized more about the strike-breaking role that Black workers had that would benefit Henry Ford.
Well, that was another competitive advantage too, because I don't want to pay these workers, but also the productivity. Because it was just seen that the black labor was exponentially more productive.
Now, I would say it depends. If you're talking about farmers, the white farmers and the Black farmers, I would say would be hardworking people generally, who were accustomed to doing much more lengthier and more difficult work on the farm than we had to do on the factory. Yeah. Now, the factory work was hard. I mean,
I can only imagine what pre-OSHA, because that's something new too. Pre-OSHA, I assume factory work was not. Yeah, it was not. No.
I worked in the factory in the early '60s, and it'd be like you had to pick up cars, and move car parts around and stuff.
Yeah, man. I'm not saying. Hey, I'm not.
Speed. It was. You would be so exhausted.
Yeah.
But for a person coming directly off of a farm in the 1940s,
from sharecropping
they used to work
it's
12
like
hours, 14 hours a day.
Sun up,
hot
to sun down.
You get food when you get it.
You share the crop, meaning you work your share to get some crop to either eat or sell yourself.
And you had to operate and build and manage everything on the farm.
Yeah, it almost
you
been
were
like
a manager as well as doing all the work with all the different animals and the plants, the cotton, sugar, tobacco, whatever it is. You're doing everything.
Sharecropping was
all day
tough
until it got dark.
Yeah,
so working and you only got paid maybe $10 a year or something.
Yeah.
So to come to Detroit and make $3 or $5 a day, but in a year you would be able to buy a car.
Yeah.
And maybe a few years you'd be able to put some money down and buy a house. So this was a qualitative leap forward
Yes.
that was unprecedented in our experience.
And that's where I'm saying I'm not necessarily saying that the worker, so yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I'm not saying that the work here was easy per se.
No,
but I'm just saying based on what's comparative.
Right.
Similar to what we're seeing now with what's labeled as, I guess, what's happening at the border is clearly for people to go through the extent of what they're going through to come into America. Think about the conditions that you got to go through to get into America just for the opportunity to probably work for some off-tier company that's making cereal for God knows what. And you're probably going to only get like $10 a day, but it's like, this is way better than the opportunities I had in where I was from.
Yes, and the fact that the U.S. has destroyed the economy in the places where they're coming from.
Where you coming from. Yeah,
so they don't have a choice.
Yeah, so it's like
do or die.
So now I guess I'm going to fast forward even more. International politics, because we already right here, and I know we get into a close. You have a lot of experience in this. How did you start getting into international politics, brother from the city of Detroit? What was the connection?
I would say the first thing would probably be the in the Negro newspapers at the time. There was J.A. Rogers carried a weekly column, something like Ripley's Believe It or Not. Did you know this black person did something great in Africa, South America, Asia, Europe, in ancient history, modern history? And
but it was a lot of international facts in there too.
Yes, that was one thing. Haile Selassie came to the United States, and I don't remember now what year that was. And there was the Bandung Conference in the 50s that I remember in the news, in the black press, because in the white papers, many of the white papers around the country didn't have black news at all. And some that did would maybe one day a week they would have a Negro section about sports and crime, entertainment.
I don't know. That kind of sounds similar to today. And so
that's true, but it's more than one page.
It's like, wow, media just cover for black people,
right?
Sports and crime. Like, what does media cover for black people?
So you had
Funny,
to read,
but it ain't
so you had to read.
Hey.
We call it either the Negro newspapers or the colored papers. In the barbershop, the barbershop that I went to was very rich. On the table, there were papers from. You had the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Amsterdam News, the Centennial or something from California.
Yeah.
And men were discussing the issues from around the country and in Detroit. And periodically there would be something happening internationally. The Bow Mau struggle was going on in Kenya against the British.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't understand many of the issues they were talking about, but I always had questions.
Soaking up some game.
I want to know why, how come? And I never got the answers I wanted. And then in high school, the Korean War was discussed. And so I knew guys who had gone to Korea in the neighborhood and cousins. And I was asking, well, why is this war going on? What are you fighting about? And nobody ever knew. All they said, well, we doing what we told.
Yeah.
And we're glad to get the hell out of there and get back home. And that was, and third.
Well, I'm going to give you the American line. We were fighting for democracy.
Yeah.
Continue.
And there was also the racism in the military that they pointed out first.
Yeah.
Because I had talked to the GIs during World War II.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how they spent more time fighting with the white soldiers than they did fighting whoever they were supposed to be fighting.
They sure did.
Korean War, the same thing. So in my senior class in high school, this was in '59. Now we were talking about the reasons for the war in Korea. And he said the answer that you had said, that it was for democracy and truth and justice. Okay, well, that makes sense.
It's like
I was 17.
23 years, 2023. It's the same stuff in the media. Ain't that something?
So I was 16 years old here
Ain't
reading
that
this.
something?
But I accepted that. The next year, when I graduated from high school, I went into the Air Force. I liked the uniforms, and the girls liked the uniforms. So that was, and we travel the world, and you go and you get some more education. And that was all I was thinking at 17.
Yeah.
But I met guys who had been in Korea, and I asked, and they were discussing their experience in the war, and it was totally different than what I had read and what the teacher had told.
Oh, man, Time Magazine. Got it
So
wrong.
I said, well, this is what I read. This is what I was trying. And they laughed at me so hard. I mean, they fell out on the floor laughing. Yes. I was pissed off.
I got you. It's like, hey, Time Magazine got it wrong? How? Now,
I clearly understood racism, domestic racism. That was, I had grown up listening to that. But I didn't know anything about the international scene. So I thought that the purpose of the military was simply to defend the country. I didn't know we were bullies and that we were going around causing the problems,
Yeah.
And so the more I said, well, I've got to start learning everything all over again because they lied to me. So I would go around asking the older GIs, about their experiences wherever they were. And everybody said, it was everybody's report from their analysis of what was going on was always different from what the government said. So I said, well, I've just got to start from scratch. But it gave me a lot of interest in international affairs because the Cuban Revolution came up at the same time I went in the Air Force, and the Algerian Revolution was going on. And I was beginning to hear stuff about the Congo with Patrice Lumumba. And I didn't understand what it was about.
Yeah, at the time. But you were
at the time.
But you were using the logic of like, okay, well, I know if I'm reading this here, it's probably a deeper truth that does exist.
Yes. Now, I knew that they were lying about what was happening in the United States with black people because there were lynchings were still going on. And I was stationed in Mississippi for a year during the time of the sit-in, so I knew.
Oh, man.
So the racism was just boiling up. I was just getting more and more angry every day. And then I heard.
So 1 second, time out. I gotta ask this question too. Wait. You just hit a life point because I know some brothers that have served in the military and everything else. Even my grandfather. This is a home that was purchased. One of the few black people that did get the GI Bill. John Brown was a hell of a hustler. He had to hustle like hell to get it too. He lost a leg in World War II as well. I think that added to possibly some of the benefits, but also a lot of hustle in John Brown. Granddad, rest in peace. But basic training. You went through basic training in Mississippi?
In Texas.
What okay, because I know some brothers and sisters that were pretty tough, and I'm not trying to. This isn't let's expose the military, but I know some people that have died in basic training, not modern day. What was basic training like in Texas in the 50s?
Well, I would say in the Air Force, it was not as difficult as it was in the Army, and certainly not as difficult as the Marines.
Okay.
And it wasn't as long.
Okay.
Because their focus was to get us out into some type of training. And I was getting ready to go to electronic school. I went to electronic school in Mississippi.
Okay.
That was still a part of the training, but it wasn't physically as rigorous as the military basic training standard.
Okay, because I was wondering, I'm like,
but I had heard about the deaths in training camps in the other branches. Now and then something would happen in the Air Force, but that was not. That was unusual.
Rare, but it usually would be the Marines,
and the Army. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So You leave from Mississippi, you're learning more, you're seeing this, and you're getting a pulse. Where are you getting the information? Just from, I know you're talking to the GIs. Other than GIs, what places are you being able to pull some of this international information?
Well, while I was in Mississippi, at the same base, there were GIs from other countries stationed there.
Yeah.
There were Ethiopian soldiers in Biloxi, Mississippi, when I was at Fairchild Keesler Air Force Base. And so I was talking, they were young guys too, but they were older than we were generally.
Yeah.
And they had more knowledge about history of their countries. And so I asked them, the Ethiopians, about their history. And so I learned about their fight with the Italians going back to the 1800s when they defeated Italy in the late 1800s. And then World War II. because their view was that World War II started in the 1930s, when Italy attacked Ethiopia.
It did.
And then I learned there were Philippine soldiers. I learned about their wars and struggles. So these discussions just continued to raise my interest. And I identified with the African GIs. I identified with the African people. And I don't know how that originated specifically, but I know my grandmother always talked about we when she talked about Africa and other black people. She always spoke about black folks as a family, whatever the news was.
Yeah.
So black folks are rising, when Selassie came. So then I went but I heard also about Malcolm X while I was in Mississippi. And the young GIs who had heard him were just fired up. So
Wow.
if you heard Malcolm, you were to go out and get involved in the struggle and want to go out and fight,
So the dynamics because I could imagine speaking of and about Malcolm X on a military base in my mind, I'd assume that would be strongly frowned upon.
Just among the black GIs.
Okay.
There was little
Okay.
socializing. Although there was no longer a segregated military, we didn't socialize together.
It's like America now. It's not segregation, but I mean,
de facto.
look at America. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I mean, we could.
You go on the college campus.
Yeah.
The black students are sitting over here.
Yes.
And they are not, and the white students.
Yeah.
Now there are individual friendships.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying like it's not, but the signs ain't there. But in reality,
yeah. So those conversations were going on. And that continued as I got to Washington State. I was up in Fairchild Air Force Base near Spokane, Washington. And that was a completely different experience.
Spokane is definitely It's a lot of white power thinking in that region, but I mean a lot of America, but especially that Pacific Northwest is hey. Keep your head on the swivel, brothers and sisters. But continue.
So my consciousness was growing, and I wanted to know more. And then now we get to the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is a secret, and so one of the government tactics then is they want to recruit young GIs my age to go to Vietnam. Not as soldiers, but as advisors.
Yeah.
Who will be wearing a uniform.
It's some advisors in the Ukraine and
Afghanistan.
and Gaza right now, and Afghanistan and Israel. I don't think a lot of people know about some of the advisors in Haiti right now. With some advisors in
everywhere we got conflicts or itchy interests
across the world. If it's a conflict, it's some American advisors advising.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I was this, and they also promised, the promise was if you go to Vietnam, you get more promotions, you get $50 extra a month hazardous duty pay, and you get access to more women. Mm-hmm. Well, those were all important things to a 17-year-old. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm going to get promoted and get just $50 sound like so. And so I raised the question because I heard the civil rights people were expressing opposition to the war. Mm-hmm. Malcolm said, well, the Vietnamese never called me a nigger, Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking about all this, and I asked in the chow hall, this young guy sitting around BSing, and the issues of all the international and national politics comes up. And I said, I don't see, I think that we're being bullies. We're getting ready to attack small countries like Cuba or Vietnam. They barely have an army, air force, anything. We're just going to go and bomb these people, and it's not fair. If communism is the problem, and we've been drilled about how bad communism was, and they said, well, the headquarters of communism was in Russia, Soviet Union at the time. They said, well, if communism problem, how come we're not fighting the communists? Why are we fighting these little countries that can't fight back?
Hence the Cold War concept.
Yeah, and so now this went on for several years, and now I'm a couple of years 3 years into being in the military then, and there was a discussion about actually invading Cuba getting involved in Vietnam in a larger, more impactful level. And so I expressed opposition to it just as other GIs in the chow hall. And so somebody went back and told the commander what I said. And they called me and said, "God damn it, Simmons, understand you said you won't fight for your country."
That's another one of those things that will often be said then.
Yeah, and I said, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but I'm not going to fight against, I said, I don't want to fight against the Vietnamese and the Cubans. I didn't say I refused. I said I didn't want to. So he said, well, you know, you're in the military. You don't have no choice about what you do. You have to do what you're told. And so, and they said, where did you get these ideas from anyway? You know, and I told them I had read I was reading Martin Luther King's Stride Toward Freedom, and he mentioned Thoreau and Gandhi. And so I said, I'm a pacifist. And he said,
"Oh yeah, that definitely didn't fly over well."
Yeah, said, you mean if somebody attacked your house, you wouldn't fight? I said, no, I'll fight if somebody attacked my house. I said, well, you're not a pacifist. I said, oh, well, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight those places, you know. So he said, well, you put that in writing. And so I went and talked to some of the older guys. They said, what should I do? They said, well, definitely don't say you refuse. You're going straight to jail. So I wrote a very vague statement saying I prefer not to do this. So, and so they kept this for a couple of weeks trying to figure out what to do with me.
Interesting.
But at that moment, I was lucky or blessed because they didn't want any type of resistance or any negative discussions in the media about coming from the GIs
about Vietnam
or Cuba, and so their policy at that time was just to get us out of there quickly, and so I had written a letter. I wrote letters to the minister at King Solomon. Charles Diggs, who was the congressman then, and to my grandfather. Diggs didn't respond, but it was good that I wrote him because they thought that I might have some connection with him, and so that would be a problem.
He's Charles. Yeah. His name is Charles. They both black. They from Detroit.
They all know each other.
Ah, man, it's a congressman.
So they can cause trouble.
Yeah.
And my the minister denounced me for being unpatriotic, which I didn't know about at the time, but he laid me out. And that really disappointed me because he was a person who always spoke of high morality. You do what you think is right, and so on. And so he backed off. But my grandfather said that he's talked to the other Union men, and they agreed that I should do what I thought was right. And that was it. That opened the door for me to do what I felt I was doing.
So were you given a dishonorable discharge, or what happened at that point?
It was under honorable conditions. You know, said they immediately sent me to a missile base underground. It was an underground community. And so there were other guys there who were called
So basically, like you were, they sacked you, kind of.
Yes.
They basically said, we going to put him in the back. They gave you detention.
Right. It's all like being under house arrest.
So you were in detention, and I'm guessing some of those guys probably had some of the more reasons why they were there, and y'all just talking to each other like, hey, man, And
they were reading books that I wasn't familiar with. I mean, they were reading Baldwin and Richard Wright and Frantz Fanon. I mean, they didn't have Fanon, but they had Bertrand Russell, the socialist.
Wow. Yeah, okay.
Jean-Paul Sartre. And I had never even heard of most of these people. So I was just getting a college education there underground at the missile base.
So ain't that something? They sent you to a place to get more information to validate. So it's almost like they going to call you up in 6 months and be like, you learned your lesson? No, actually, I got more points. Let me tell you. I got this, this.
Right. So shortly after that, they sent me to a chaplain who told me that it was God's duty for me to cooperate in their duty.
Wow, this is interesting because the layers of process of what I would consider indoctrination and like your pastor, Pastor Boone at the time, I believe you said, like I assume he's not like internalizing what it is. He's just regurgitating probably the process that's been told to him. He's not thinking, one second, let me think about this. I know Charles Simmons.
Yeah.
He's just looking at what the government, the framing of how the government will look and being unpatriotic and all of that, like similar to, I mean, I think Vietnam was the conflict that flipped a lot of America's minds on like, yo, this is crazy. It was like the Kent State protest and things like that made people say, yo, what is going on with, why are we focused? Even after, like, you know, now it's always brought up. When I think that was Harry Truman that spoke of the military-industrial complex. Right. But like even when that was presented in that speech, most Americans, that just went over the head of most Americans. Like they didn't, it didn't stop Korea. You know what I'm saying? It didn't stop what was happening. It it was just one of those things where, we're being patriotic. These other nations don't have freedom. They don't have democracy. They're living in the perils of hell, and communism is horrible.
And in the media, when they showed pictures of other countries, it's always poverty.
Yeah.
So you knew that the United States was better off than everybody else. Now, a lot of it was true because World War II, I remember seeing pictures of white folks. I mean, the Europeans were slaughtered in World War II. It was just like looking at pictures of folks in the poorest of the poor countries now. Europeans laying out in the street, you know, like folks in Gaza.
But and even that, when you look at Oliver Stone has a great, I want to say it may be like a 7-part series.
I've seen some of that. He does very good work.
A lot of World War II and its impact. Like, so just study it. But one of the key things that provided America this position as on the world stage is taking advantage of basically setting the stage and picking up where Britain was and dwindling away as their position in the world stage right after World War II. So some of and being a nation that was so far removed from a lot of the conflict at that time that and really, to be honest with you, America,
removed.
Yeah, geographically removed, but in reality, I mean, America was making weapons for the axis of evil,
right,
and the Allies. You know what I'm saying? Like, if we're being serious,
we sell guns to anybody.
Yeah, so
everybody.
So while that conflict was going on, America was industrially profiting.
That's right.
Exponentially.
Yeah.
And then the bombing and the vestiges of a lot of what happened left America in a very key position to take the world stage with a lot of these Western European powers.
Yeah, we took over all the British military bases and added ours and the French and everything.
Yeah, and yeah, so it's like so watch more of that Oliver Stone stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Oliver Stone is really good, excellent resource.
So you're seeing this, but this is deeper than Oliver Stone. You're seeing this, and it's touching your heart right now.
Yes.
And with that, and I know we got to get to a close. I'm gonna definitely have to get you back because I'm just still getting into the introduction. But you yourself into this international work, and as you're finding this out, and you're becoming more enlightened, who are you sharing this information with as you leave the military, and how are brothers and sisters here in America taken to? Like, you know what I'm saying? The people on decks, the Linwood 12, like your community, how are they taken to the information you giving them? Like, hey man, let me tell you really what's going on in the world.
Well, as soon as I got back to Detroit at the end of '62, I met people from Wayne, Uhuru. Well, we hadn't formed Uhuru yet, but I met students.
Okay.
And in December, I met students. When I started Wayne in January '63, and then I met all the black militants on campus. There's probably a dozen of us, all over.
That's a powerful dozen. So like yourself, General Baker,
Luke Tripp, Charlie Johnson, John Williams, Rufus Griffin.
Yeah.
There were Ken Cockrel.
Yeah.
And so we shared ideas, and we were all anxious. We were angry.
Were any of them ex-military as well?
Ken Cockrel was in there. He got out of the Air Force the year before I did.
Oh, interesting.
And so we sit together in the student center and shared ideas.
Yeah.
I think he had even started law school then, but he was getting ready to go to law school.
Yeah.
So that was the sharing was within the organization, and then I met the older people then, folks in their 30s, who were in the group on advanced leadership.
Yeah.
Melton Henry, Richard Henry, Reverend Clegg at that time.
Yeah.
Ed Vaughn, the great Grayson, Jimmy Boggs, and others. But we worked together. We were the juniors, and our group was a junior, and we were what we would be considered wild now, very much like Black Lives Matter before the Black Panther Party started, but we had similar orientation. But our focus, we were dealing with Detroit segregation, mainly the police brutality. That was a regular protest, and we had protest about the lack of black folks working in these supermarkets around the city and in India and other types of businesses. There was a big protest about the Olympics. Detroit was trying to get the Olympics. And we protested because the city council, which was all white, had voted against integrated housing. They voted to maintain segregated housing in the city council. So we protested, and our folks got arrested. And
let me frame this the right way, because I think when people talk about this as he's sitting here and he was grown then, like sometimes people hear stories like that and they think, oh man, 21. That was a long time ago and da. No, he was 21. And a lot of some of those city council members and all of that have streets named after them that you live on.
Right.
It's your block. Rappers are making songs about that block. For somebody that was like, we do not need a black person living on the same street as a white person. Like, that's not that long ago. Like, sometimes I think people think of it like, oh, that was just way back in the day. No, way back in the day was like
a minute ago.
Yes. As we see, the stories are still crime and sports for black people. And we happen to be having bombs and guns and soldiers in places across the world.
That's right.
Advising
and destroying other people.
They need democracy.
Right.
Happening right now. My bad. I just want to frame that because I don't think sometimes people recognize the real framing that like, yo, that's not that long ago.
Right.
And a lot of back then when people say, oh, it's backwards, I wouldn't stand for that. You're standing for it right now.
That's right.
We're just not as aware.
And some of the things are worse now, you know.
Yeah, in certain ways it's happening.
Poverty is worse.
I mean, we spoke to that a little bit before we started the interview. It's exceptionally worse.
Yes.
The collective standard, the standard quality of life in this information technology age, as it's labeled now, not the industrial age, has definitely heightened people, as we were just having a common conversation about the average person is probably working, 3 jobs. And then also, like, you were like, hey man, you got some kids? No, I don't. I definitely would love to be a father. But like most of us look at children as like, okay, that's going to be a burden of about $250,000. Can I afford that?
Right.
And this is tough because it's having impacts on how people are making life decisions.
Right.
Whereas, expendable time to even make critical thinking decisions. I mean, it's people, I'm sure you've been in an Uber before. I mean, I have this discussion. Yeah. It's some people that have been my Uber drivers where it's like, this person got a PhD and literally should be leading something.
Or other taxi drivers,
Or taxi drivers or door dashing or just caught in tough situations. And I'm not necessarily framing it as like this is bad, but I'm just saying the abundance of opportunity that exists as this as the wealth gap in America has exponentially expanded post-industrial age, because at one point in time in America, to be a titan of industry, meaning like to be like a giant or a business person people looked up to, it would be, General Motors proudly said, we have 400,000 workers across the world. Right now, I think the most exceptional companies will say, we make billions of dollars and we got a room probably this big. And my studio is like the size of a regular room. And we got 7 people. The goal is to make as much money as possible with as few people through enough automated processes as possible and keep it to yourself. And the only people that can benefit from that are people that invest and are shareholders more into whatever the entity is, which has had strong detrimental impacts on what quality of life for most Americans
Yes.
could be.
You mentioned the jobs, a lot of the service jobs that we have in Detroit now. Those types of jobs we would have done as students while we were waiting to get into a profession or into working in the factory even. Because if you took the college route, you wouldn't end up working in the factory at that time. Now, it would still be good to work because at that time the factory working jobs had the highest wages.
Yeah.
But very seldom did you see people who were working two jobs, in my experience.
I mean, nowadays, there's people working two jobs, a side hustle.
Yeah.
And probably trying to get a third job.
Yeah.
Which, if you have a family, and that's the people usually working that, the discussion really opened with, you were saying that you were gathering for a family gathering for Thanksgiving where children had some lessons about history and learning, and I was like, that's powerful. And I'd assume, and my assumption was, I'm guessing that was probably college education. You were like, man, it was just me and one other person. And I'm like, wow, that families with children can actually have the expendable time to sit and develop lesson plans to share with children is something that is a luxury in America now.
And I hadn't thought about that, but that's true. Yeah.
You know, it's a luxury. Like, whereas, you know, due to other hence the workforce that existed, especially in a place like Michigan with the big three, well, big four at the time, you know, industry was so abundant that people had more expendable time to dedicate to things, you know.
Now, what I did was work in the factory maybe a semester. I would quit and go to school. And then leave school and go back to work in the factory. I did that all off and on. I would just go from one to another till I could get enough credits.
Yeah.
And then I went to Langston University in Oklahoma my last 2 years. But, you know, we had time for families to sit down for dinner together. I mean, everybody at the same time. I mean, now everybody's got different schedules. People have to leave and go to other cities to get jobs. So the families are really scattered in a way that wasn't then. Of course, with the immigration, we moved away from our families in the South. But then we were settled for a couple of generations before people had to start moving again. And with the families, there was a division of labor between the husband and wife, or the men and women. So there was some understanding about what she's supposed to be doing this, and I'm supposed to be doing this. So those things made it that system made it easier. That was a vestige of being on the farm. On the farm, everything is very clear about who has a duty. The girls have these things to do. The boys have these things to do. The husband and wife have their things laid out for them. So you don't have the type of gender conflicts that we have now, when there's a very chaotic type of no arrangement between who does.
Because I think it's a scarcity of resources. So like one person's like, what can you do for me? What can you do for me? Because everyone needs something done for one another.
Right.
Which leads to, actually, I love to close with this because this is where I wanted to go. And rest in peace, Mama Simmons. Mama Simmons was, as we're building our relationship, just in passing, I would come across so many interactions with Mama Simmons before she passed. Rest in peace. Just as I said, like another asset to community in so many connections, and was so known in the community larger. I mean, Loom, just through being married to you, international communities, but Detroit, a very, very, very beloved, you know, and one of those big homies that it's like, wow, you know, that one was tough. And I can only imagine, but your story, when did you all connect? How did you meet?
we met at Eastern Michigan, the campus, which is now what's the campus over there on Myers near 7 Mile.
Northwest Activity Center.
We met at the Northwest Activity Center, and I was a regular faculty at Eastern. She was part-time. We didn't know each other. And so I had inquired about who was teaching this Black Studies class that I wanted. And somebody said Sandra Flinoil. I didn't know it was a black woman. I didn't know who it was. And so I was going to take the class. I was going to take full rank because a lot of the white faculty didn't want to teach in Detroit in the first place.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a white woman.
Yeah.
And you really wasn't that serious about teaching the class. Well, I'll take the classes. And then Melvin Peters, who was on the faculty at Eastern, he had taught Malik Yakini.
Baba Malik. We know Dr. He's been brought up. Dr. Peters is definitely another. I need to get him on Detroit is Different, most definitely.
I just talked to him a couple of days ago.
I need to get him on Detroit is Different. A firecracker.
So he told me, when I mentioned her name, he was the only person who knew who I was talking about. So he said, "Oh, that's a bad sister." So we had never talked about women before. We was out in the hall waiting for the elevator. I said, "Well, that's a good idea. Well, I won't take the class and I'll do something else." And so I had a different class, and we happened to meet in the office.
So it's interesting. So it's almost like you heard of her. Then it's like, then he validated like, oh, no, she's on point. So you was like, okay, I'll back away. It's like you manifested now meeting her.
In fact, Melvin also told me on another day before I had met her, he said, Sandra can really cook too.
Okay, it's like, all right. Now you got two things in your mind. It's like, okay, she knows the people, and she knows her way around, a good meal. Okay, all right.
And Melvin Peters' wife was a beautiful black woman, very intelligent, community activist. So I said, well, I can trust his judgment.
Oh, so you were like, okay, he has good taste. So now, when I interview Dr. Peters, this is going to add more layers to the discussion. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to talk to him about this, but so he was partly responsible for us getting together. That was great.
So when you meet her, you were like, okay, she is fly, she knows her stuff, and I'm guessing just in that space, because being black in academia is. We'll talk about that in the next interview. It's its own dance. But
so we met. I was really impressed. I said, well, at a minimum, we can become good friends at a minimum.
Okay.
But I asked her to go out. And in fact, I asked her, I said, I want you to come over to my house. And I have an exhibit at my house.
There you go. Hey, there you go. See, Dr.
She said, all right. So she said I was, BSing. So I said, actually, I really do have an exhibit. Let's exchange syllabi. I invited the whole class to come.
Yep.
And so that happened. And so we went out for dinner, and that just escalated.
Wow. And with that, working together in this space, just share, because we were talking about family connections, relationships, because obviously you were doing this work, yourself, you've done this alone, but what value do you think, I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit here because I'm going to say enrich and value and everything. What was different about having a connection and sharing in your work with someone else?
I saw it really as much as I saw my grandparents' relationship, because both of them were activists and doing different things, but they shared philosophically. They had similar ideas, and I thought that they were a team. Not only their outside work, but everything in the house was organized. We had the schedules and everything. He did cooking on certain days. She did certain things on certain days. And I never heard them discuss any of this, but when I look back at it, it was really a very organized type of routine. I felt that we built a team together of any project that we needed to do. We both had similar ideas about what could be done and how to do it. And so I didn't have to explain anything to her about the foundation of the project, or she didn't have to explain stuff to me. because she was a veteran activist, and so we started off at a very high level of consciousness and work in the community, and so she brought a lot of stuff about the women's struggles and family building. Her family had a very rich experience with the grandmother, who brought the extended family together and maintained the connection, a very positive connection within the family for generations. And so my family was smaller, but we had similar experiences, and so that added a lot of wealth to our relationship. The extended families that we had, and we also had a practice of adopting people in the community to be family.
Yeah.
I mean, and we both saw our students as potential leaders, and we wanted to build leadership among our students, and so that was something. Our students weren't simply people who came into our lives for a semester. Those who we adopted, there was a lifetime relationship.
That's deep.
And so we both shared those types of values and ideas. And so it was a very, very, and we had a love for travel. We shared the Pan-African view, and a view that the society we built needs to be an egalitarian society. We shared the views about the role of women, the need for the liberation of women, and the need for just building our young people and the intergenerational connection. So there were so many things that you cannot do by yourself.
And it overlapped because I'm guessing you had these values before.
Yes.
But together, like what were some of the differences? I'm guessing because this is the other thing, like I often tell people, like, when something goes awry, as we were having a discussion, like before, not today, but before, like just about it's some stuff that don't make sense to happen in our community because some of the things that we've gone through. And my response usually is, I love Black people, but it can get exhausting in this space and this movement work. What would be that relationship then? Because, it'll be like, all right, this is where our people should be. This will help our people the most. And then the direction seems to go adrift that way.
Yeah.
Where, because this stuff can get exhausting. It's for me at least, and a lot of the people I talk to. How would you all share in that? But then also even sharing the victories of it. Like, what was that experience like?
That's a lot. My wife was in the ministry, and she was actually working in ministry before she was ordained as a minister. So she was heavy into theology, and her graduate work was about theology and also integrating a international perspective about theology, so that she was Baptist, but she saw the need for having an ecumenical relation, that is, relationships between different faiths and different denominations, that we should all be working together. Now, that was something that I believed. I always thought that there should be that other religious types of organizations should be working together. I've always felt that. I hadn't really discussed it, but it was something that made sense to me. But she was practicing it, and she was teaching a lot of ministers, theology and religious history and stuff. So that was something new that I was just really getting into. I had the spiritual values, but she was much more advanced in that area. So I was learning that, and I believe she was learning a lot of the international ideas from me about, although she had the grounding, but I had a lot of experience and on the front line.
Similar, like the balance.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like I know a little bit of this text, I know a little bit of that text, but she can make it holistic.
Right.
since I know a little bit about this conflict, I know a little bit about that conflict, you can make it holistic.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we shared the idea of a family experience about feeding people. It was a Southern. We both had very Southern values. Mm-hmm. We were raised by Southern people, and so when anybody come to the house, we have meals. She liked to cook, and so we brought the community activists. When the community activist folk, we have just a meeting. Well, people got to eat. So that became a part of our tradition of just of feeding people, and so you'd be surprised if you can have disagreements about a lot of political things and stuff, but when you start eating some good food, you find some similarities right away.
I like it. So I'm gonna close on this. I got two more questions for you. So speaking of that, as you said, Dr. Peter says she can't cook.
Yes.
What was the first meal that she made that it was like, yo, Dr. Peters was right?
Fish. She had an assortment of fish. Mm-hmm. Fried fish, baked fish, and all types of different. She was a gourmet. Her grandfather was a professional chef.
Okay.
Who worked on the international shipping lines.
Oh, okay. So she had some inside track.
He taught her. He took her around as a child to all these restaurants where his friends was cooking. Mm-hmm. And so they prepared special meals for them all the time. And they would go back in the kitchen and talk about food. And, so she had that experience. I had never met anybody who knew that much about food.
Okay.
So that was something brand new to me, but it was great.
There you go. All right. And very last question. I really appreciate this interview. This is a new one. I usually have my other classic Detroit is Difference. Your favorite adjective?
I would say, off the top of my head, I would say Venceremos.
All right, you got to explain what that is to me. I don't even know the definition.
It's a Spanish word that it was used a lot during the Cuban Revolution. Mm-hmm. And it means really very similar. It means we will win. Victory. Fidel Castro would always end all of his speeches, Patria o Muerte Venceremos. And it was very much like we shall overcome in a more militant sense. I mean, it wasn't... Sometimes people think about the phrase "we shall overcome" as something very passive, but I didn't see it that way. And other terms are very important because we look down on some of the other terminology we used to use, like being colored or Negro, which those are negative. But at the time, those words had militancy and pride, you see. But the new generation always looks upon the old generations as not as high achieving as we would like to be now. So we're going to change the language, and I'll say now I'm black or now I'm African American or something. But there was a lot of pride and fight and revolution in those terms at the time when they were new. Yeah. So Venceremos is something that is in my heart. That we will win, we can win.
That's a great note to close on. Thank you so much, Dr. Simmons. And we're going to be doing some more stuff.
Okay.
As Dr. Simmons reached out to me and said, hey, I want to get something set up and all of this. This was very fun. You got a lot of game. And I love everything you said about Mama Simmons. Rest in peace. Definitely true asset for our community that's still, in today, great to lift that spirit up.
Thank you.
Peace.
You're listening to the Detroit is Different podcast network.